Hey, Lyndon, Tommy here. Thanks for your work the past couple weeks in our course. I am catching up here a little bit and been able to read what you've been submitting. And I wanted to send you a video just to highlight a couple things that I think are insightful in what you're doing and that I want to encourage you to keep developing here as we're moving into the second half of the course. The first is I think your kind of observation that illness, disease, which is such a big part of the drama of Matthew's gospel, is not just a medical condition. It's not either just a sort of malady that an individual is suffering. Diseases always involve relationships between people, how their bodies relate to each other, and they always reflect and in some ways mediate a variety of structures of power, social power, political power, economic power, these kinds of things. Power that we might classify today as religious, but that really wouldn't have been conceivable as a separate category before a couple hundred years ago in our part of the world. So this is just a great observation because, as I think you're teasing out, when Jesus heals people, he is engaging that whole complex of relationships and structures of power. And because of that, the healing, while it might immediately produce kind of relief for the individual person, it ripples out through the relationships of that person and affects all the structures that have kind of influenced that illness and are then affected by the healing of that illness. You can see that maybe explicitly with what the healing of the leper does, where if Jesus heals this person, it sort of brings into question, do we still need the priest in the temple to be an institutional part of reintegrating a body that has been quarantined because of a contagious illness? And the narrative deals with that. Same thing with the Sabbath. You know, if Jesus heals someone on the Sabbath, there's a question about what the Sabbath is, which is this pillar of the political economy of Israel's life that is being sort of troubled, but maybe also reformed in how it is functioning in the social fabric. So that's just a great insight, I think, in your analysis of the healing that Jesus has been doing. Carter is obviously helpful here because he highlights the way that imperial oppression produces illness and is sort of, you might say, counteracted, subverted by the way that people might be healed of their illnesses. And that is, I think, sort of way into this wider question of the full scale of what is in view when someone is being healed of a disease. So, imperial oppression certainly deserves to be named and analyzed. But as I think you're seeing, there are other dimensions to the condition of a person, of their community, that are colluding, you might say, with that imperial pressure to produce the illness. And then Jesus is interacting with all of that in healing someone. The same is true of his apostles and other people that are learning the kingdom power to heal. I hope that's also, I mean, you're often reflecting at the end of your responses on what this is doing for you. So I'm glad you're thinking about that. But I think that is a really crucial part of our study is to be asking how we are learning the nature of God's power, the nature of God's rule, how Jesus is present among us and in us, how we're learning to conduct our bodies, how to use our words in a way that is in tune with this wider sort of constellation of relations that are involved in disease and in healing. So I hope that that is instructive for you, and I hope you'll keep thinking about it. That kind of helps me segue into the second issue that I wanted to bring up, and that is what you've said, I think, here in this week's work. So this is week 5 about divine power. I just kind of seized upon this one comment that you made that you're sort of realizing that God's power, God's justice specifically, um, is not just, it's not a matter of God dominating an opponent. It is a matter of transformation. And this is a this is a really important, I think, kind of realization because we often have in our minds this idea that what it means for God to be God is to control everything, to make everything submit to God's will. But that's not actually the picture of God that we get in the Bible, or really finally a defensible account of divinity, I wouldn't say. Instead, God is revealed as powerful by the way that God is involved in the human drama, assuming responsibility, burdens for the human in specific ways, not simply meting out some kind of retribution or negative consequence for human injustice, but then uh, rather operating in the aftermath of any way that injustice is curbed so that what led to that injustice is not simply repeated, but subverted, and new possibilities emerge in the lives of human communities and persons. So, God's justice is a dynamic, transformative reality that involves God's own life in the drama of the human. It has a horizon of full healing, full peace to it. And this takes place not by God simply, you know, directing submission to God's will, but by the way God gets involved and assumes the difficulties of the human as God's own. That has a lot, I think, to teach us as we contemplate what God's call upon us is in the pursuit of justice and how we might participate in God's power, learn God's power, exercise even God's power. It's not going to be simply by amassing some kind of dominant force, whether that is by violence or whether that's by elections. Simply prevailing in an election by amassing a majority, it might be a step forward in some ways, but it's not really something the Bible would recognize as justice, because the point is not just to get uh, sort of submission of the opponent. It is to actually transform the bodily conditions of people on the ground. And that's always going to require a kind of ongoing engagement with opposition. There's always an aftermath to any kind of confrontation or struggle for power. So this is where, if you're familiar with Dr. King's teaching, he would talk about beloved community as the aftermath of agitating for peace or advocating for justice. It's not enough simply to win a certain battle against an opponent. There's always a Christian investment in the aftermath and the goal of the participation of all in the repair of the life together that God has given to us. So, hope that's helpful to you. It's a great theological insight, and it will get developed, I think, as we see Jesus, you might say, plunge deeper and deeper as God with us in the drama of his people, which finally, of course, involves all of us. So thanks again for your work in the past few weeks, and look forward to more to come.